Hello, Wonderhussy here at the Craig Road Pet Cemetery in fabulous Las Vegas. Now, there's supposedly a bunch of interesting pets buried here. Supposedly Nicolas Cage and Snoop Dogg have pets buried here. And even more interestingly, I guess they had some kind of special thing where they could bury humans with their pets at this cemetery. I don't think they do that anymore, but back in the day, there are supposedly some humans buried here with their pets. One of whom, I think, is Pat Morita, the actor who played Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. Well, he lived in Vegas. I guess he wanted to be buried with his pet. And from what I read online, I think he might be buried here somewhere with his pets. How about that? Oh no, look. Police dogs. Aww. Aw, man, there's a bunch of police dogs that work for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. See, LVMPD K9. Aww. Look at that. Patrolling Heaven's streets. Aww. Thank you for your service, Danny. Oh gosh, as a matter of fact, there's a woman carrying her pet into the cemetery right now, wrapped in a blanket. Oh, I guess there's a crematorium in the building there. Anyway, none of this is actually why I came to this cemetery. I came here to pay my respects at one grave in particular, and that is the grave of Stony the elephant. Okay, it's real hard to read it because the light is kind of funky right now, but it says, "In loving memory of Stony, a gentle giant." And you can see people have left flowers, and there's a little elephant, and there's even a little rock with an elephant painted on it. So who was Stony the elephant? It was actually a really sad story. Stony was one of those showbiz animals. You know how they used to put animals in shows? We're in Vegas, and there's all these fancy hotel casinos, and all the hotels have their own production shows, extravaganzas, and back in the day they would have showgirls and magicians, and then they would have animals. And so apparently there was this show at the Luxor Hotel featuring Stony the elephant, and I guess the Stony's trainer didn't really take very good care of him. From what I read online, he was malnourished, he didn't get enough vegetables, he had knee problems to begin with, or bone problems, but his trainer taught him how to do this one trick where he would stand on one leg, on his hind leg. He would do the one-legged stand, and everybody in the crowd would go wild because, wow, an elephant standing on one leg. Well, Stony had bone problems to begin with, so every time he stood on one leg, it was really bad for him. And then eventually, I guess, he ended up breaking that leg, and he couldn't get up, and oh, God, the article I read online was heartbreaking. I guess they were going to bring him to an animal sanctuary, but in order to get him to the sanctuary, the elephant had to be able to stand up, and so they were using a crane trying to lift him and get him to go in this truck, and he just couldn't. He was just laying on the ground crying, and he had to be euthanized. It's one of the saddest stories in Vegas showbiz history, and I guess after they euthanized poor Stony, they brought him over here, I guess, and cremated him and buried him right here in the pet cemetery with all the police dogs and other dogs and cats, and gosh, who knows? Stony might be buried not far from Mr. Miyagi. Anyway, the story of Stony is absolutely heartbreaking, but believe it or not, Stony isn't the only elephant buried in Las Vegas. There's another elephant buried in Vegas whose story might be even sadder. This is Siegfried and Roy, and it's my favorite statue in all of Las Vegas. This amazing golden statue is tucked in a shady nook in front of the Mirage Hotel, and I'll bet you anything, most of the people walking by have no idea who they were. But I do. Siegfried and Roy were these amazingly over-the-top, bonkers German magicians who performed in Vegas for decades. And they were unlike any other magic act Vegas has ever seen. Not just because of their amazing hairdos, their fabulous outfits, and their fantastic plastic surgery. Although those were all incredible, and something you really had to see to believe. But what really set them apart were all the wild animals they used in their act. Okay, they had cheetahs, panthers, leopards, lions, and most famously, snow white tigers. Okay, white tigers are a naturally occurring but very rare genetic mutation. But thanks to years of selective inbreeding, Siegfried and Roy were eventually able to raise a family of something like 50 of them, which they trained to perform in their magic show. Now, I was lucky enough to be able to see their show a few times myself, and I have a copy of their old show program here. I told you, these guys were absolutely bonkers. But look at how amazing their outfits were. And look at how beautiful the tigers were. Now, unfortunately, since the only way you can raise white tigers is through serious inbreeding, not all white tigers are this beautiful. Just Google Kenny the Down syndrome tiger if you want to see what I mean. But Siegfried and Roy's tigers were as beautiful as Siegfried and Roy themselves. And so they lived and worked together peacefully for many years. Now, you might have certain opinions about animals being forced to perform in show business, like poor Stony the elephant, but say what you will, at least Siegfried and Roy's tigers had a pretty pampered existence. I guess Siegfried was the magician, and Roy was the animal guy. And Roy really spoiled his babies. They all lived together at 2 palatial Vegas estates where the tigers had free range of the grounds with swimming pools and ice caves to help them stay cool during those hot Vegas summers. I mean, compared to poor Stony the elephant, these tigers had an amazing life, splashing around in the pool all day, going in to perform in the theater by night after night for 30 years. I'm telling you, the Siegfried and Roy show was the biggest spectacle in Vegas, if not on the entire planet. You really had to see it to believe it. It was the hottest ticket in town, right here at the Mirage, 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week, year after year, until October 3rd, 2003. That was the night when one of the white tigers attacked Roy live on stage in front of 1,500 people and almost killed him. Now, I guess there's some controversy as to what happened that night. Roy said that he suffered a stroke and fell down on stage, and so the tiger just grabbed him by the neck to drag him off stage to safety. But to everybody watching in the audience, it looked like the tiger had just finally had enough of being bossed around for years and decided to attack Roy. But either way, Roy almost died, and even after years of intensive rehab, he was never able to perform again. Anyway, once the show ended, the animals ended up languishing in a zoo out back behind the Mirage, okay, because people still wanted to see the animals, so Steve Wynn or whoever built a zoo back there called the Secret Garden of Siegfried and Roy. Okay, it was right out back here by the pool, but unfortunately it closed down during the pandemic, and then Roy died of COVID during the pandemic, and Siegfried died of cancer not long after, and the Secret Garden never reopened. So what happened to the animals? Well, thankfully, say what you will about Siegfried and Roy, but they really did apparently love their animals, and they had excellent caretakers working at that zoo who saw to it that all the animals were rehomed at sanctuaries. And now that the Hard Rock has bought the Mirage, well, the whole zoo's probably gonna end up getting bulldozed to put in some douchey ultra lounge. So what does all this have to do with Stony the elephant? Well, Siegfried and Roy had an elephant in their show too. A female named Gildah. Now, side note, I was a pretty big Siegfried and Roy fan back in the day. In fact, you might even say I was mildly obsessed. The first time I came to Vegas in 1999, my sister and I went to see their show, and it was so over the top and so bizarre that I just couldn't help it, man. I became a fan to the point where once I even wrote a song for Roy about his relationship with one of his cheetahs. And I played it on my guitar, and I recorded it on a cassette tape. Remember, this was 1999. And I packed it up in an animal crackers box and mailed it to him. And to his credit, he or somebody who worked for him actually listened to the song. And so I got a signed postcard in the mail thanking me from Roy. I mean, it had his signature on it. I don't know who actually wrote the postcard. But thanking me, and you could tell they had actually listened to it because they referenced all the lyrics. Anyway, when I moved to Vegas, I even got to work at their show a few times as a souvenir photographer. Okay, you know when you go see a show in Vegas and those annoying chicks come around and stick a camera in your face and go, "Get together, I'm gonna take your photo." Well, that was me. Now, the company that I worked for did photos at pretty much all the shows in Vegas. But like I said, Siegfried and Roy was the hottest ticket in town in those days, and the most expensive. It was the first show in town to cost $100, which nowadays you're lucky to get a ticket to any show in Vegas for less than $100. But back then it was a big deal, so it meant the people in the crowd had money, and they would buy more photos so the photographers could make more commission. And so consequently, since I was new in town, even though the first thing I said when they hired me was, "I want to work the Siegfried and Roy show," well, unfortunately, you had to work your way up. And so the only time I ever got to work there was when one of the old bags who'd worked their way up to the spot called in sick. But I did get to work there probably about 10 times. And so I got to see the end of the show 10 times because we'd bring our pictures out at the end of the show and wait for it to finish. And at the end of the show, Roy would come riding out on Gildah the elephant. And I always felt really bad for Gildah because, well, the tigers all had each other, but elephants are social animals. They want to be around other elephants. And Gildah was the only elephant in the show, and so she always just looked kind of sad. Anyway, why am I standing on the side of the road in this random neighborhood? Well, like I said earlier, Siegfried and Roy had two palatial Vegas estates, okay? They had one closer into downtown, kind of by the Strip, called the Jungle Palace, and I showed that place in a video before. But I guess the Jungle Palace, it's right in the middle of town. It didn't have enough room for all their animals, so they also built this big 100-acre estate up in North Vegas called Little Bavaria. Okay, remember, Siegfried and Roy were German, from Germany, so I guess they wanted a place that would remind them of their homeland, so they built this spread with a ton of trees and grass and apparently some kind of little old-fashioned Bavarian cottage in the middle, way up here in North Vegas. Right here on Rainbow Boulevard, a spread big enough for all their animals. That's right, I guess all the tigers, leopards, panthers, cheetahs, and the elephant lived out here, and then they would just truck them down to the Strip when it was time to do a show. Well, I guess because neither Siegfried or Roy had any children or any heirs, after they died, the property just ended up being sold to a developer who's building apartments. Or at least that's what I read online. I mean, here in person, it looks more like they're building houses, which either way is a blight and a bummer because this place looks absolutely amazing. I think we can maybe peek over the fence and take a look ourselves. I don't know, can you see anything? It's probably not much left. They've been dead for a few years now. But judging from the amount of trees, and if you go on Google Maps satellite mode, you can see for yourself, this place is still pretty green and pretty lush. So it would have made an amazing public park or community gardens or something like that, but I guess capitalism is capitalism. There's just one major bummer. And that is that whenever one of their animals would die, Siegfried and Roy would have them cremated at that same pet cemetery where Stony the elephant is buried. And then I guess they would keep the ashes in urns at their house. Well, when Gildah the elephant died, I don't know if she was too big for the oven at the crematory or what, but according to this article I read in Vanity Fair, they buried her instead up here at Little Bavaria. So I don't know if this developer knows anything about this, but apparently there's an elephant buried somewhere on the grounds here. And I just think it's really sad. You know, if Gildah's grave ends up getting paved over and then covered in a bunch of ticky-tacky little boxes full of ticky-tacky little people who probably don't even know who Siegfried and Roy were, let alone Gildah the elephant. I'm not kidding. I'll bet you the people who end up moving into these houses have no idea who Siegfried and Roy were. Like all those people that were walking past the statue on the strip. I mean, the show ended over 20 years ago. That's like a lifetime by Vegas standards. And besides, times have changed. You know, you go down to the strip now and it's all Cirque du Soleil. Nobody wants to see a couple of gay Germans in ridiculous costumes and outrageous cod pieces with a bunch of enslaved wild animals. Anyway, if anyone watching this is in a position to do anything about it, I'm here to advocate that Gildah's remains should be dug up and reinterred someplace respectful. I mean, not like poor Stony's grave was all that amazing, but at least there's a memorial where you can come leave little elephants. After all the money that Siegfried and Roy's show brought into Vegas over the years, remember they did 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week for something like 30 years, and the tickets were like $100. Seems like the least the city could do would be build some kind of memorial for Gildah at like the Springs Preserve or Sunset Park or something like that. Some place where people could go and leave flowers and pay their respects. Or what if they buried her at the Craig Road Pet Cemetery next to Stony the elephant? You know how elephants like to be around other elephants, which neither one of them was able to do during their lifetimes? Well, at least this way they'd be beside another elephant in the afterlife. But I know, it's Vegas. Why would anybody care about a dead elephant when no one even remembers Siegfried and Roy anymore? In fact, I'll bet you anything, when the Hard Rock takes over the Mirage, they're probably even going to change the name of the road leading into the hotel, which was renamed Siegfried and Roy Drive back in 2020. And for sure, that amazing golden statue of him out front of the hotel is headed for the junkyard. Unless somebody watching this happens to be in a position to where they can give it to me. I think it would look amazing at my place in Death Valley. Nah, the odds that Vegas would build any kind of memorial to poor Gildah are pretty slim. So I guess the best we can do is, well, just give her a thought at least. Anytime you're driving through this part of town, which we're near the intersection of Rainbow and Rancho in North Vegas, just down the street from the Santa Fe station. Okay, I climbed up on top of my car so I could look over this wall and get a better view of Little Bavaria. Unfortunately, these construction workers that are building these houses have really loud Mexican music playing. But anyway, I don't know exactly where on this property poor Gildah is buried. But wherever you are, R.I.P. Gildah, and thank you for your service.